All right, guys, we'll get started here in about a minute or so. We're not quite there at 12, so we'll let a few remaining folks hop on so they don't miss any of the good stuff we got coming for y'all. I kind of felt All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in with us today for our May webinar. I'm Jessica Lenahan.
And Kayla Hsu.
And we are Kinetiq Health Program Managers here at Apex Benefits. And you're going to be spending about the next 25, 30 minutes with Kayla and I as we talk through our topic today, which is how to set boundaries, specifically healthy boundaries. So as we let folks jump on just a little bit longer, we are going to do a little bit of some webinar housekeeping. So as a friendly reminder, all attendees will be in listen-only mode, so your microphones will be muted. With that being said, if you do have a question or a comment, I know Kayla and I are going to be throwing out some questions to the group. So if you do have something that you want to put in the chat box, you can locate that at the right-hand side of your webinar screen. And then so that way you guys can hear us, you can either listen through your computer audio, or you can also dial in with your phone. And then we do have a PDF uploaded of our slides for today too, if you'd like to reference back to anything that we mentioned today and talk through. And you can find that on the right-hand side by clicking that paper icon. So today, what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about what boundaries are, and maybe what some common relationships that you might need to have boundaries established. Discuss the negatives of not having boundaries in place, or maybe having unhealthy boundaries in place. Identify how to set a healthy boundary if that's something that you are struggling with, or maybe don't know how to get started. Discuss the benefits of having those, and then wrap up with a little Q&A from you all. So like I said, hopefully you guys throw in some questions for us so we can have an open discussion at the end. So to get us started, I think it's kind of good to always go back to the basics. And in general, all of us know what a boundary is. A lot of times we think of it kind of, in the physical context in terms of, a boundary line, a fence, if you will, or a wall. But so a boundary is, according to goodoldDictionary.com, something that indicates bounds or limits, is limiting or a bounding line. So like I said, it's kind of that barrier that tells you, hey, do not enter, don't go here. In the physical context, a fence, like I said, a wall or something. There are many different types of boundaries, though. It can range from physical, as I mentioned, sexual, emotional, mental, financial, time focused, which I think is one that sometimes I don't really always think of. But when we're talking about setting healthy boundaries, a lot of times we're talking about from a relationship standpoint, specifically that emotional and mental well-being. So I will turn it over to Kayla now so she can talk through who we might need to have boundaries set up with.
Yeah. So we mentioned you might not be sure who to set boundaries with or how to go about doing so. So if you have those questions or feedback, please share that in the chat box. Jessica and I are going to go through those and discuss that at the end. But in terms of which types of groups of people or relationships you may need to set boundaries with, the first example we're going to go over is with friends. And so with friends, this, I don't know if you would agree, probably one of the more tougher boundaries to set with friends, but also very important, rather than just ghosting your friend and not saying anything to them at all. It's really important to make your boundaries clear and known. And so as an example, maybe you have a friend who only wants to call you or hang out with you just so she can vent about her own problems. The conversation is always focused around her and her problems, and really leaves little space to focus on you, your life, or even your problems if you had any you wanted to vent about. Of course, you want to be supportive, right? You want to be there for your friend. But over time, if this continues, if you don't set an emotional boundary, for instance, you're going to build up resentment for your friend, or you might begin to half-heartedly listen to her problems because you don't have the capacity to deal with it, really ultimately damaging your friendship.
I think resentment is key when you're talking about boundaries, not having healthy boundaries in place, because that distrust can start to build over and over. I think a common one that we might see this with is spouses. And friends might be one of the tougher ones, but spouses might be one of the most important ones that you should have boundaries in place with, just to ensure everyone feels safe, heard, respected, kind of in like a kumbaya. You know, we're a team, and so we need to appreciate each other's boundary lines and stick with them. You know, certain spousal relationships might deem some boundaries to be more important. For example, you know, yours might be emotional needs, making sure emotional boundaries being met. My relationship might be financial, for example, where that's, you know, kind of like our tough line. And so having those conversations with your spouse is always really important. I think it's important to know also that boundaries can change with the seasons, kind of the seasons of life that you're in. I know, talking from personal, you know, experience, my certain boundaries that I had in place with my husband have changed since when we first got married to now that we have, you know, a child in place, or not in place, but, you know, now that we have a child, you know, some of those boundaries have changed because of naturally the season of life that we're in.
Even when you were dating too.
Even when we were dating, it's changed. You know, yeah, maybe finances were separate when you were dating, and now you decided when you get married that you're going to merge your finances. So thinking through a budget, maybe you're saving for a down payment for your home, things of that sort. So having those constant conversations with your spouse is key. So that way, you know, you keep that trust and don't end up having resentment, as you mentioned with your friend's example earlier. Again, another tough one, family.
Family.
Again, raise your hand if you need to set a boundary with your family. I think, yeah, this is, again, one that either we've all struggled with or had to put in place, maybe one that we want to put in place. And it can be a really tough one to navigate and try to determine the best kind of practice or approach to do so. You know, maybe you have a family that you always feel like there's something negative, kind of like when you said your friend calls you and it just feels, you know, overwhelming and negative. Maybe there's always family drama circulating. And so knowing that, you know, that there needs to be a boundary, but how to go about it is sometimes a really difficult thing. I think a lot of times we think of defining boundaries with family, at least I do, is with parents, in-laws. That's kind of the first go-to and one that people struggle with. But I was actually watching the Today Show. I watch the Today Show when I get ready pretty much every day. And I wish I remember the author in the book that they were interviewing and had on a couple weeks ago, but she was talking about how they have family meetings every week. And I don't know about you, but when I had family meetings growing up, that I was in trouble. Or I did something, I was, why are we having a family meeting? What happened? Are we moving? What's going on? And so, but she has family meetings where they can basically, anyone within the family can bring something to the table, whatever it may be that they want to discuss, maybe it's something they want to do. But anyways, her daughter wanted to join a new sport. And so at the family meeting, she said, I'd like to enroll in whatever, but she was already in a sport. Her son was already in something too. And as a family, they collectively decided, you know, our boundaries that we have in place, not only financially, you know, maybe this isn't something, and you know, an extra $200 that we want to spend, plus, you know, maybe travel costs, etc. But time as a family, is that a boundary that we can really, you know, can we make room for it? And they decided ultimately no. And I think that's an interesting way, because sometimes when you think of boundaries, it's I need you to do this for me, or, you know, with an extended family member, but it can also be your internal kind of close-knit group that you have those boundaries with.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Another important boundary area too is with work. And so a lot of you said in the registration that work is a boundary that you sometimes struggle to set those boundaries with. And I will say you're not alone. That is something Jessica and I talked about, that we too do struggle with sometimes ourselves. And so this could be a coworker who comes and interrupts your meeting often, or tries to talk to you when you're on a call already, or maybe they're interrupting you when you're in a lunchtime webinar today. Or it could be, you have a boss who always, emails you and is asking for work requests after work hours. Or they might be texting you on your personal cell phone and asking questions about a project, again, late in the evening or on the weekends too, and just kind of crossing that after work hours line that you may want to be there. This may also be a work boundary with yourself even. So thinking about your own boundaries within yourself of what you'll allow and what you'll do and not do. And so this might look like, if you don't have one in place, it might be that you're answering emails, you are working on projects when you're supposed to be on PTO or vacation, and taking time for yourself to relax and recharge. So as you reflect on some of these examples, take a moment to think about your own life, kind of evaluating your own needs, and if there are any of the areas for the examples we went through that you might need a boundary in place. And so thinking about this, maybe you're not feeling heard and your needs aren't being met. Or you could be exhausted, feeling overworked, which can really lead to burnout, right? If you are always burning the midnight oil, working 24/7. This can be especially hard too if you have a hard time saying no.
Yes, man.
Yeah, we've all heard the term people pleaser, right? You just hate telling people no, so you're taking on extra projects that you don't have the capacity for, or maybe even in your personal life, you're the ones, dropping the kids off or dropping the dogs off, and then you're doing pickup, and then you say, yes, I'll make dinner, and yes, I'll do all the household chores. It gets to become a lot of spreading the bandwidth of just one person sometimes. Or it could be, in the work setting, maybe you have a coworker who dumps all of their, really personal problems onto you, and you might not mind to help or, offer some advice, but it might make you feel uncomfortable doing it at work, where it may not be appropriate. So of course, and also feeling guilty as well, feeling guilty about expressing your boundaries in the first place. You should not feel guilty for vocalizing your needs and recognizing that you have them, and you need boundaries to be set in place. So this isn't a comprehensive list by any means, but just kind of a few signs that if you're feeling, any of these things, that maybe you need to reevaluate and you might need to set some healthy boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's something, something that all of us have resonated with. Like you said, whether in the past or currently, I know a few of those. I'm like, yep, checkbox, checkbox. Yeah. So if something that we said kind of resonate with you, or again, you're shaking your head, or you're in that checkbox type of mentality that I mentioned, but you're kind of in that state of, well, yeah, I've tried that, or easier said than done. We have this handy dandy formula that you can try next time you're maybe trying to set a boundary. So when you're first getting started with setting boundaries, first and foremost, it's most important to define, determine what the actual boundary that you are wanting to establish is in the first place. And then you need to communicate it. Say what you need or what you want to happen. And you mentioned that earlier of how it can be internal. It can be when you mentioned the work, maybe it's an internal thing that you have where it's not actually having that conversation with a loved one or with your boss. Maybe it's something that you talk and communicate with yourself, that it's something that you're going to put in line. Thirdly is establishing staying simple. Don't over-explain. Don't feel guilty. Don't apologize. You don't need to elaborate a big, huge reason, and you're going down the windy road of this is why. Point blank, this is the boundary that I'm putting in place. And lastly, set consequences. Share why it's important to you, and if the person cannot, follow through or respect what you've put in place, that there will be consequences associated. But I think consequences can sometimes come off very negative.
Yeah.
I think of like I'm disciplining my child, 1, 2, 3, you're going to have a consequence if you don't listen to me. But it can just be as simple as, I just won't be able to fully be what you need me to be if you don't, follow the boundary I put in place. It doesn't have to be a hard line of this negativity is going to happen if you don't.
It doesn't have to be a threat.
Right. Doesn't have to be a threat. Exactly. So following our formula, let's kind of talk through maybe some examples that all of us in real life maybe have dealt with.
Yeah. So going back to that friend example, identifying my boundary, I am feeling emotionally exhausted and unseen with my friend who only wants to talk about her problems. So to communicate what I need from her is I need for her to check in with me and see how I'm doing, and do I even have the bandwidth to listen to her. So I think a good way to be able to do this is to say that, hey, I understand you're having a hard time and I want to be there for you. It's really important to communicate that, yes, I do want to be there for you, but I don't have the emotional capacity right now to listen. So how do you think that sounds?
And that could also, allow them to, one, examine and realize, maybe they don't realize that they're doing it. And they just, they have so much on their minds, they just want to get it out. But it allows them to have that moment of, oh, well, let's set up, maybe what time works best for you to connect, or how can I be there for you, kind of flipping the table.
Yeah, like, oh, you must be going through something if you don't have the emotional capacity.
What's going on? Yeah. Yep.
Sure.
Spouses, using, kind of going back to the example I used about trying to save for a down payment. Maybe you had a boundary set in place with your spouse that, we're going to be trying to save for a down payment for a house. So we're limiting how much we eat out, maybe trying to not do those Starbucks runs as often, which guilty. But, and maybe the spouse isn't respecting that. And so creating that boundary of, I'm not feeling respected when you're not following through with the boundary that we had previously established. But I think it's important here in this example is going back again that things change. You can reestablish your boundaries. Maybe one that you put in place isn't working for whatever reason that may be. So again, maybe your spouse still continues to go out. Maybe you can communicate that, I need you to stick to a budget with me, work together. But I understand maybe having the approach of, none at all isn't necessarily going to be realistic.
Yeah.
And so how about we each get $30 per week instead, for example, to go and have lunch out, or maybe, get your Starbucks run. Depending on what you get, that's 2 to 3 times out a week maybe, or whatever, budget you decide to choose, of course. But that could be changing your boundary based on if something's working or not working, and coming collectively together, reevaluate. But the consequence in this example would be, if you're not able to help me with this boundary that we haven't set for our finances, we're not going to reach our financial goals. We're not going to be able to move into that beautiful dream home that we have as soon as we want, or that we want as soon as possible, because we won't have the money for our down payment. And that is the consequence for not doing so, as well as possible resentment, distrust, as you mentioned earlier too, could start to build.
Yeah, someone can swoop in and then take that house.
Yep. That sure happens. Family, again, this is a very hard one. Something that I know I've dealt in the past with my mom. She has, she's loved to call me or text me during work hours. And that has made me feel super flustered. Like I'm in 2 places at once. I need to respond to you. You're texting me constantly. But I have work tasks. I have a job to do. And so I can't devote time to both. And so defining, I feel overwhelmed when you constantly are messaging me or expecting a call back when I'm at work, and communicating that to her. I need to be able to focus on my work tasks. And in order to do so, I'm going to maybe put my phone on do not disturb while I'm at work. If you text me while I'm at work, please do not accept expect, there we go, a response while I am in work mode. I'm going to have, do not disturb on. But if you do still send me multiple texts or calls, at the end of the day, if I have, 20 text messages to reply to, kind of like my doctor's office has this in place for my child's pediatrician. Please do not leave multiple messages because it might delay us getting back with you. You know, the more you text me, I might not feel like I have that mental capacity. So please respect, and I will get back to you later this evening when I have the free time to do so. But the consequence would be, you know, if you keep texting, it might delay it.
Yeah, and I like what you said about communicating too, because she may not know you're feeling overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And then by saying this, maybe the texts, they scale back, or they're, you know, after hours, after you're done working.
Yeah, to some, a text is just a text, but to others, it's, you know, so much more. You don't know where that person is in that certain moment.
Yeah, exactly. So for our final example, work. So using that same example I mentioned earlier, so the boundary that I might need is that I'm feeling stressed out about some upcoming project deadlines, and I've been working late just to stay above water. And it's really hard to concentrate when I have, you know, coworkers, they come, you might want to chit chat, interrupt my focus time throughout the day. And so I need to communicate what my needs are. And so I need my coworkers to be respectful and understanding of my upcoming important deadline, and that I need to focus. And so I think one way that I can preface this is by saying, you know, I like chit-chatting with you, but I'm starting to feel stressed about these upcoming deadlines that I have next week. You know, I would really appreciate it if maybe I had some uninterrupted time in the mornings where I could focus and concentrate on my projects and meet that deadline. And so since we do work together, you know, if I said something like this to you, how would you respond to that? What do you think?
I would of course be empathetic at first. I would feel bad that I'm not allowing you to get the work that you need done if that was me who was just, you know, being chatty Cathy back there, which is possible. But you know, I would be empathetic, and I would try to maybe jump in, see if there's anything that I could take off your plate for you. And I think it also would allow me to then try to be more courteous moving forward. If I notice you're being really quiet, or checking your calendar, maybe I'm really eager to tell you something, or, you know, but I've seen other coworkers of ours, they'll put, you know, focus time on their Outlook, or they'll say like no meetings, you know, getting prep work. And so also utilizing your calendar function and maybe being courteous of your coworkers and checking their calendar could be something beneficial too, for kind of creating that boundary at work.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be scary to begin to address this. I think some of our examples too, our natural responses were, well, maybe we should check in with them, or, you know, see if they need help or something like that, or reevaluating, oh, how can I be more courteous to them as well.
Yes.
So we just went through a few examples of how you can set some boundaries among different groups of people and different relationships that you might have. And so one of the biggest benefits of doing so is that you will feel so much better. You know, only we know what we want and what we need to feel seen and supported. And so we can make this clear by setting those clear, healthy boundaries. First of all, it's going to help your mental health. It's good for your mental health. It can help you to be less anxious and less stressed, especially at work. It can help to avoid burnout. Again, you're not burning that midnight oil. You're not working 24/7. Setting boundaries can also help to improve your self-esteem too, by making your—
Never really thought of that.
Yeah, making your values and making your beliefs known too, that you're not just kind of quietly sitting there and, you know, have your own thoughts and stuff about the subject, but you don't want to rock the boat. But saying, you know, I believe this. I'd appreciate it if we didn't talk about this right now, especially when thinking at family functions, how people like to talk about politics, that, hey, I think we'll have a better time if we don't discuss this, or we discuss this at a later function, later event.
Which being courteous of other people's
boundaries. Yes. And two, that leads us right into the next one, promotes healthy relationships. So instead of resenting your friends or family, or just kind of avoiding those calls, avoiding those family functions altogether, it can really help to avoid future conflict too among your relationships. And of course, ultimately, it helps to promote self-care, really by prioritizing yourself, prioritizing your needs. Jessica and I have talked about how really boundaries help to protect your time and really helps to protect your emotional capacity. And so with that brief overview, now we'll see if there are any questions that we have in the chats or any comments.
So one that I saw that popped up that made me laugh, because I said this earlier too, is they appreciate everything that we talked about, but it is easier said than done. They shared that they have a friend who lives out of state and they always seem to call at the wrong time and they can't be available for them. How do you set a boundary for that friend?
This one's interesting because I think when we're in the middle of it, sometimes it feels like such a big deal. Like, I don't know, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I can't, I don't know how to communicate this, but kind of the bird's eye view looking in, it's really communication being key, saying that, hey, the time's not working when you're calling me. Let's set up a phone date, or let's set up a FaceTime to really connect. Your friendship's important to me. Also kind of thinking about evaluating, are they on a different, like, why do they keep calling me at really terrible times? Are they in a different time zone? Maybe, they're mountain time, they're not realizing, oh, I thought you were just an hour ahead of me, you're 2 hours ahead of me, so you're sleeping by the time I'm calling you.
Yeah, one of my best friends, actually, she lives in Denver. And so when it's 9 o'clock our time, when it's a good time, my daughter's asleep, but it's, 6 or 7 her time, and she's like, I'm having dinner. I'm trying to regroup from the day. And so it's not a good time for her. So I can sympathize also with that same scenario.
Yeah. The other one that I see on here is related to work. I get a lot of work emails on the weekend and feel anxious if I don't respond right away. How do I leave work at work?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think it's one that so many of us deal with. I mean, especially because, hi, technology, our phones, we have Outlook, Gmail, everything, Teams,
watch.
My watch, I get, my Teams alerts on here. And so, we kind of are in that, I don't want to necessarily say millennials or Gen Zs. I think it's multi-generational at this point, but we all kind of live our lives now on demand. As a society, we have shifted to, I have availability to you 24/7. Whether that's work, family, friends, find my friends. I can see where my friends and my family are at all times, if we kind of take it a step further. And so I think it's really important, trying to limit how on demand you will allow yourself to be. Whether that be when I'm on PTO, vacation, weekends, maybe I leave work at 5 o'clock. I turn off all my work notifications. That is a boundary that I do not take home with me. I think also another boundary when it comes to work is maybe not discussing with your loved one, not coming, sometimes you need to do that, but not coming home and continuing the work conversation with your spouse at dinner. Leave work at work and try to figure out what stopguards in place that you can put in place to help you accomplish that. Again, it might be turning off those notifications. My husband in the past, he's deleted Outlook from his iPhone when we've gone on vacation to prevent him from getting on and just, because sometimes I think of Outlook even, or like Gmail is like another form of social media.
It's mindless.
I'm just like, let's see who emailed me. I'm not even out of bed yet, but I'm gonna look. And not having access to that allows you not to do it and sets that boundary already. All right, did we have anything else in the chat? I'm not seeing anything pop up. All right, well, with that, we thank you guys so much for your time today and talking through a little bit of establishing healthy boundaries. But before we did wrap up, we did want to leave you with this quote from Brené Brown. And if you haven't heard of Brené Brown, she is an amazing social psychologist. She's a professor at the University of Houston, and she really focuses on, building courage, being vulnerable, establishing boundaries. And so from her book, Gifts of Imperfection, she has, when we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we can feel used and mistreated. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing a behavior or a choice. It's really powerful. It is powerful, yes. So yes, with that, again, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you next time in our June webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Mhm. Yeah.